Entrepreneurs are really the ones who are driving change, bringing about the innovation, and the more diverse set of entrepreneurs I can support along the way, hopefully the more impact I can have in the world.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Brubaker here today with another episode of the Mission Driven Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm trying to engage, inspire, and equip the next generation of mission-driven entrepreneurs. And in this episode, I'm extremely excited to be joined by Karina Wong, who is the head of investments at the Small Foundation. Small Foundation is a philanthropic foundation whose vision is a thriving Africa free of extreme poverty. And through their work, they're creating the environment for micro, small, and medium enterprises to succeed and deliver at opportunities on scale. Welcome to the show, Karina. It's really great to have you here to speak with us about the work that you're doing, what you've seen over your 15 years of work experience in this space, and as a starting point, just an introduction to yourself and the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Rich, and thanks for having me. So I am head of investments at Small Foundation, and our focus is on the elimination of extreme poverty in sub-Saharan Africa. So what that means is we work with rural enterprises and help to build the ecosystem around them so they can thrive. We invest in everything from funds to fund of funds to nonprofit organizations, and we offer everything from grants to equity investments. We primarily work with intermediaries, and we look to have a systems transformation approach towards all of our work. And what that means is that we are hoping to catalyze as much change as possible. I kind of fell into impact investing. It wasn't, something I chose to do, but kind of just happened along the way. In college, I was really, really focused on naive notions of trying to save the world. I had worked at the UN for an internship, and I had thought that would be my dream job. After getting there, and I was working in Geneva, I felt that the pace was really slow. Like change wasn't really happening fast enough. And when I went back to speak to my professors, they had mentioned that, well, if you really want something fast paced, why don't you try investment banking? So I did. And so that's kind of the impetus for how I got into the investing part of it. But the impact part of impact investing has always been something that's core to kind of what I've really been passionate about and what I really wanted to follow in my career.
What to you then is an impact investor, and what do you think the role is in the market for driving mission-driven entrepreneurship or solving the challenges that you saw, say, in your early career or even in Africa?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key difference for an impact investor versus a regular investor is that you're considering different dimensions when you're looking at an investment. It's not just about financial returns, but you're also looking at the broader context of where the investment sits and whether it has impact on the environment, socially, on communities, or even how businesses are run.
So then how do you see the world a little bit differently when you're looking at a deal or working out what are the trends that you should be investing into?
Ultimately, your financial returns and your long-term, if you're having positive impact on communities, on people, it's better for business. So they align ultimately. It's just that upfront, you're saying that I'm going to look at these considerations differently and not just in a one-dimensional kind of factor that you're looking at.
When you mention that long term, like how difficult is it to invest into a longer term when you see those as being like current issues, although the returns aren't necessarily there?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. In the longer term, I think things will align, but it's kind of all those short-term changes or interventions that you need to make to generate the returns. We have definitely a long-term view. We know poverty is not going to be solved overnight. So we are hoping that we can make incremental changes that will catalyze other changes. So we say the returns will get there. It's just a matter of timing, and that we're willing to take that risk to make those changes happen.
What was the I guess the idea for impact that you were looking to have, as you came into this career?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have a pure definition of impact in terms of my own career. But what I found was, throughout my career, the common theme has been working with entrepreneurs. And I love working with entrepreneurs. And for me, having impact and working with entrepreneurs, the ones who have the ideas, and to support them along the way is something I'm quite passionate about and really excites me. So it's kind of, I just followed the entrepreneurs in many ways. And then by following the entrepreneurs, I was able to then craft maybe maybe, I guess, my own impact thesis that entrepreneurs are really the ones who are driving change, bringing about the innovation, and the more diverse set of entrepreneurs I can support along the way, hopefully the more impact I can have in the world.
What is it about? I'm going to get into this. Why do you love the entrepreneurs so much? Like, what is it about them as an individual, as an idea, as a whatever? Like, what is it about them that you like? You're following them, or you're really looking to support them versus be one yourself?
Well, I think one thing is I come from a family of entrepreneurs. My father was an entrepreneur, started small kind of businesses. So it's kind of in my blood a little bit. But at the same time, what I love about entrepreneurs is the sparks and ideas that come from entrepreneurs, and the kind of that constant changing and adaptability that entrepreneurs have. And when I see the opportunity of what can happen and how things can leapfrog or change dramatically through kind of innovations from entrepreneurs, I just always get inspired. So
you wrote a piece for Impact Alpha where you said Small Foundation has long observed an issue within the field of development, saw that impactful ideas became strong pilot schemes with the potential to support a particular area, country, or region out of poverty. However, all too often these solutions had no means of scaling or struggled with sustainability past their initial phase. When you were writing this article, like, what was your experience that you were drawing off, or what was the thought process for really highlighting that as like the key area to be focused on?
So when you talk about entrepreneurs, you're talking about different types of entrepreneurs who can start, starting a range of different types of organizations. And what we saw is a lot of organizations that were predominantly grant reliant. So they were using grants and they were trying to scale with grants. And that becomes incredibly challenging for a few different reasons. One is because the incentives aren't aligned. Oftentimes donors may have different metrics or outcomes that they're looking for that aren't necessarily good for the business or the operations, and really may not have the end beneficiaries in mind. So that's one piece, but also that grant funding is very limited. There's and it changes in terms of where the priorities are. So it never has a chance. So these businesses or these organizations never really have a chance to get out of that valley of death. This is where we start thinking about, well, that alignment of commercial viability and that long-term outlook. If you align to like focus on customers, focus on your product, focus on meeting the needs of the communities, then you're going to inevitably create a better business, and then you're going to attract more capital, and then you're going to grow and scale.
I know that the reliance on grants has been an issue. For me, that's more of like a fundraising challenge. I mean, is it a fundraising problem or is it a product problem? Like, are there specific barriers that you keep seeing coming back to, or is it really the funding cycle is really core to that?
Well, for your typical entrepreneur, it is really hard to get that startup capital. And oftentimes what you see in an African context, at least, that grant funding is probably more available than, say, friends and family, or say there's not a broad angel network or broad network of people investing. I think that's growing and changing. And so then what happens, I think, if you have too much grant funding, it could be distortive in the market, and so that you crowd out other kind of forms of more commercial capital. And I think that's what's preventing from scaling, and also the different types of capital that's needed throughout that beginning life cycle and managing through that valley of death that you had mentioned. There's probably not enough capital at that early stage quite yet, because people are still concentrating on safer bets and safer ventures.
Does that problem get a little bit easier to solve because locally you have successful entrepreneurs who are willing to invest into other successful entrepreneurs, and there's also say CSR money, sustainability money, or governments themselves have more tax base that they can then put into the market for these solutions? Or like what's the distortion, and how much of that is a global to local issue?
Right. I mean, if you look at the capital and how capital is flowing in Africa in particular, the majority of the capital that's being invested is international. So it's FDI or donor kind of grant funding. Governments have a very small tax base at the moment. You do have that starting to change now. So a lot of, successful entrepreneurs starting to reinvest into newer entrepreneurs. You have local corporates also starting to invest in very different ventures. So you start to see it happening, but it's still very nascent. But you're absolutely right that that's what you want to happen. So you need to really kind of build that ecosystem for all of that to happen.
So in kind of rethinking systems in your own role, like what are the the changes that need to occur, and how, as part of the investor class or the investors, part of the ecosystem, how do you view yourself as kind of shepherding or supporting that system change that needs to happen?
Yeah, so for Small Foundation, we take the systems change approach, but we don't need all other investors to do so because we say that everybody plays a role. Different types of capital will play a different role, but the most important thing, and at the core of this mindset shift, is really collaboration. Everybody really starting to collaborate and coordinate, and that's really at the heart of what we mean by systems investing, and that all these different actors, whether it be financial actors or non-financial actors, start talking to each other, start talking about what they are doing, and really starting to understand the whole system and the root causes of some of the complex challenges that we're looking to solve, and working together to complement each other with our finance, with our investment, with the technical assistance support, so that slowly that you're working together to kind of shift those flows of capital and shift what's happening in the ecosystem. But really, it is about kind of taking that collaboration approach, which oftentimes doesn't happen with investors.
That's the vision. That's the hope of what the model should do. Where is the model these days in the work that you're doing?
I would argue that we're at the beginning, but it's probably more hopeful than you think. Investors, I think, because the markets are so nascent, because it's so difficult to really get deals done, it requires a certain level of collaboration. So you're halfway there by just talking to each other because you need a lot more capital to be crowded in.
This sounds very slow. I mean, you said it sounds better than it is, but it also sounds very slow. Like, do you think that the changes are being made at the size, scale, and speed required? Or if not, what's required? Who needs to put a little bit more gas into the work? And what will it take to get that flywheel effect?
Yeah, I mean, I think change is slow, but what you hope for is, like you said, that flywheel effect so that we can be very catalytic and that momentum is built up. And I think what it means is that there do need to be different types of capital providers up front. And we're part of this group called the Catalytic Capital Consortium, different investors who are starting to speak to each other to say, you know what, we want more of this risk tolerant capital, can take different types of returns to take that first step. And if that capital can take the first step, hopefully then others who have their different types of capital can come in thereafter. But
so since you mentioned catalytic a couple times, I talked with Tom Hall at UBS and a few others about the new, like the rise of catalytic capital. And I'm curious, like maybe can you define it in the way that you understand catalytic capital to be? And also, what do you think the problem is that it solves? Because we have patient capital, we have blended capital, we have impact capital, we have a lot of different terms. I'm wondering, beyond the definition, I'm wondering, like, is there a specific problem that this solves for now that's different than the others? Is this just a maturation, or is this somehow a blending of a couple of other ideas?
Yeah, it's for me, it's probably a blending of a couple of ideas, and we are looking at it as capital that is highly risk tolerant, so willing to take risk in a lot of different ways, but also thinking about how that capital impacts other capital in the future. And that's probably the key element for the catalytic piece. Like, what change is this capital allowing to happen that wouldn't have happened otherwise? So whether it be crowding in a new set of investors, or perhaps the capital is more concessionary to reach a new market segment so that it's more affordable, or that it is part of a capital stack to allow for a different type of a kind of investment structure that scales a particular project or fund.
Considering its potential utility, how do you think that then shifts the potential scalability, say at the system level? Because how does this help more entrepreneurs or more organizations through that valley of stagnation, death, whatever, to hit that scale? Like, is this a key new tool for them, or is just another one that you're seeing as a potential but not really clearly defined yet?
I do see it as a critical tool, and there's a few things. In order to get out of that valley of death, you often need more time. So it's one of the things is having a long-term view and having that time frame that's needed in these kind of less mature markets. The other big thing is flexibility. What are some of the options that you have to be more flexible to deal with the situation. And I think really is the key thing is to also look almost 3 steps ahead, to start planning for that up front. And that's the catalytic piece, is like, what's going to happen? How is this capital going to graduate? How is this venture going to graduate from where it is now? Who's going to pick up the baton? We talk about that all the time at Small Foundation. It's about kind of creating all of those things to make sure that there's somebody else to pick up the baton after you.
What if there's no one to pick up the baton? Does that mean that you then have to, as an organization or as the head of investments, not just consider that, but also plan for how you'll make a follow-on, or how you then work with these entrepreneurs to make sure that they're introduced to the right groups who bring the follow-on? Like,
if we don't think anybody's going to be there, then yeah. So we need to plan for how much we're going to be investing in follow-on. The other thing is part of that systems piece, where we're trying to get more people to play that role even as we pass off the baton, right? To say, we've de-risked this for you a little bit. What is next? And so our role is actually getting investors kind of interested in these type of ventures, saying that these aren't as risky as you might think they are. Then with the entrepreneurs and the ventures, saying, well, look, these are the next group of investors that you need to be talking to.
And in that sense, when you think of like new markets coming, like you de-risk the product, you show it can be done, you show there's a model for it. Who's coming in the next layer?
I think the next step would be maybe another impact investor. If you can get enough scale, then the DFIs will come in, so development finance institutions. But it would be, the next step would be another impact investor.
I mean, is there a range of impact investors in terms of like the ones that won't take any risk, and then those who are way ahead of the curve? Like, I kind of felt like everyone was together in this.
Well, we see quite a diverse range. We see some impact investors expecting near market returns, and I think you can get those depending on what sector you're investing in. But the closer you get towards smaller, poorer communities, it becomes harder to get those commercial returns without making a trade-off. Sometimes your returns are there, but it might take a while.
And let's say in the last 10 years, have there been some unproven markets that have become proven? And I ask this because I think of climate tech. Like 10 years ago, no one or fewer were involved in this, and now it's the hottest topic around. But 10 years ago, no one was talking about it. Have you seen some of these things that used to be unfundable or unknown really gain clarity, and therefore they've made it through those 3 cycles, and they're actually at scale, and now we're talking about what's left?
So I would say fintech and finance is really popular. Climate related investments are also really becoming, I don't know if you can say it's proven, but that's becoming more popular. And I guess the one sector that we're hoping that can really be picked up is agriculture, because it makes up so much of the economies across sub-Saharan Africa, but that remains very much unproven.
Let's get a little bit into you and the work that you do. I mean, you're head of investments. What do you do? Like, what's your job? And then what are you doing, say, on a daily basis to either identify, analyze, or support the entrepreneurs that are in your own ecosystem?
So I have a fantastic team that are really the ones who are looking at the investments. So we get pitched ideas, ventures, proposals all the time. So a lot of what we do is really vetting those and seeing if they meet our criteria, and making decisions around whether we may make that investment. The other side of what we do is also, once we have an investment, is to make sure that they're continuing to perform well. So we play a range of roles. I sit on the board of a couple of organizations. We play, might be on an advisory committee for a few different organizations. But it's really kind of working with some of our partners and seeing what they need. And then I guess another big part of my job is actually speaking to other investors and trying to get support for the types of things that we want to invest in. There's not enough capital to go around, so you want to get the investors lined up, but also to learn and share from each other. I think one of the things I love about working in Africa is that you have a very open impact investing kind of community that is willing to share and willing to kind of really give pointers on how best to do things.
And so within the investors that you speak with, what are some common conversations right now? Is it about the challenges, about the opportunities? Is it more tactical? Like, what are the things that you're talking about recently with some of the investors?
Yeah, I think oftentimes it's tactical, like if you're down to a transaction level. But lately, what we're trying to do is really have conversations of how we can get more people to do similar type transactions. How do you open the larger pool of capital, and and where we see the larger pool of capital is more commercial capital, or even capital that is traditionally kind of veered towards commercial markets, but we think would have an opportunity or find benefit in impact investing in the same kind of impact investments that we are.
20 years as an impact investor. What's your vision for success for the work that you're doing?
Great question. I think for me, because I'm so passionate about these entrepreneurs and the range of entrepreneurs that I see, is that if I could lay the groundwork for many more entrepreneurs who are doing very impactful work, doing very meaningful things in their communities, to be able to find funding and to be able to kind of get all the capital that they need throughout the stages of their growth, because I think those are the ones with ideas. Those are the ones who are really going to make change in the world. They're the ones who are really, really doing the heavy lifting of having impact and having impact.
Well, the other thing I've been talking with a lot more recently is that the fact that they face all the real problems. Like, they are on the ground. It's their crops that are failing, their communities that are struggling, their healthcare networks that need something. What do you view as, like, these two challenges that keep seemingly growing in size and scale beyond what we're actually putting money behind right now? How do you view that as an opportunity? Because I feel like you're very clearly pro-entrepreneur. You see the challenges. What's the role of entrepreneurs to keep up with these challenges? Or sorry, the role of investors to help keep up with these challenges? And how does that, say, motivate your work?
Yeah, and we talk a lot about trusting the entrepreneur. I'm sitting here in Chicago investing in entrepreneurs in Africa. I don't pretend to know what the day-to-day realities of these entrepreneurs are. They do. They are the ones who are facing this. And those are the ones who are really going to be coming up with the solution. So for me, a lot is around trust in that investor-entrepreneur relationship, and trust also in guiding, because as an investor, you have a very, very different perspective. They have the on the ground, I'm solving this problem. This is what I need. But then as an investor, what you can bring to the table is that broader kind of bird's eye view, like, this is what's going on elsewhere. You might need to be thinking about this. And so it is a kind of a almost symbiotic relationship where it is a partnership with investor and entrepreneur. And I think that's one of the most critical things about successful kind of investor relationships, is that if you can create a genuine partnership, then everything, everyone will benefit from that.
Speaking of trust, you mentioned the vetting process earlier that you and your team put together. Where does trust fall into that vetting? Because I feel a lot of times, particularly early stage, you're kind of buying the story more than, say, the product or the measured impact. Like, you have to put a lot of trust. So where does trust fall into your vetting? And is that a deciding factor, or is that one of many factors?
Yeah, I think it's one of many factors. I guess ultimately, on a personal basis, I would say it's a deciding factor for me. If I can't trust that you can execute on what you think you can execute, then I won't be backing you. I am a person that is much more swayed not by what you tell me, or it's more like what you've done in the past, or kind of your character and how you can demonstrate you've made some difficult decisions. So for me, that's probably where I build the trust, is through the experience and through kind of a level of candidness about your failures. I think if an entrepreneur ever tells you that they've never failed, that's someone you can't trust.
I guess, in that vein, like, I just think, like, the emotions of the work that's being done. I mean, you can see the challenges, you see them getting greater. You're very pro-entrepreneur. How does that fuel you in terms of the work you're doing? But do you have to also check that when you're making the investments? Like, you really want them to win. How do you make sure that you're not overly biased to supporting them in that emotional moment? You're like, wow, this is a real problem. We got to fix this. I got to trust someone to get it done. Do you have a process to temper that a little bit? Is that the role of a committee? Is that the role of the team? Like, how do you make sure that you're making an unemotional decision about something that you're emotionally very supportive of?
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things about being an investor. If you get super excited about an entrepreneur and say you're following the journey with them. And so you've bought into kind of what they've been telling you, you've seen, their work on the ground. And so, yeah, you could develop a bias and be really supportive and be blinded a little bit to some of the flaws that may be apparent. And this is where your investment committee comes in, hopefully, to kind of bring that reality check. Big role of the investment committee is to say, okay, have you looked at this? Have you also considered this other thing that might happen, so that if you're super excited about something, that you just don't go gung-ho.
So speaking of being super excited about something, there's a 22-year-old fresh out of school, finance background, looking to build a career in impact investment. What are 2 or 3 pieces of advice you give to that individual?
The first one is that get as much experience as you can. I think you can become an impact investor in a lot of different ways. So there's no one linear path, but just get as much experience as you can. And I think the other thing is especially if you want to be an impact investor, is that really find something that you care deeply about, because it makes the work that much more interesting. And what I've found over the years is if you love what you do, you're going to be better at it.
Following up on the first one, what kinds of experience? Are you talking like spend 6 months in Africa working with entrepreneurs?
I would encourage people to think laterally, because I think in impact investing, you need a much broader skill set than just finance. And that the more you bring to the table, the more kind of it helps you think about all those different dimensions. And so you could be in consulting, so just advising businesses, and then become an impact investor. I mean, the fundamental finance skills and investing skills need to be there. Those can be learned and trained along the way. But I think getting the experience of how businesses operate, what businesses need, any experience, you can probably just ground it in some kind of finance, then it'll help you.